This is a podcast for leaders in game development, leaders at all layers. So some of them are senior leaders, some of them want to become leaders, some of them are leading teams or middle managers. You said earlier, look, there's, if you're a lead on a team in a company of 50 teams, the odds of you transforming the culture are very, very low. Simultaneously, what are the things that leaders should know about transforming culture and how to go about doing that so that if they do end up in those senior leadership roles and they do end up with access to those levers, like what is it that you would want them to know to have that positive impact on their culture?
It comes back to this very simple kind of mantra that I have, which is if you want to improve a culture, you only need two things. You only need will and you only need knowledge. So if a leader wants to manage the culture, they need to understand what culture is, why it's important, and they have to be committed to changing it. And that sounds very simple. It is simple, but in the vast majority of companies, that is not what's happening. So, if you're a leader who's interested in this and you're working your way up the ladder, I can recommend some books. I'd recommend Amy Edmondson, Charles O'Reilly. I'd recommend our own stuff. Just understanding what culture is and why it matters, so that you can believe in your heart and in your brain that culture is something worth prioritizing, and so you can prioritize it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is once you actually have committed to improving culture, you need to know what your culture actually is and what are the high impact tangible steps you need to actually take to improve the culture. So this comes back to having knowledge, to having high quality data. And this is a little bit more of a technical problem. And basically what we would argue here is the main thing to do is measure your culture the right way. So measure your culture with AI. Don't use what every company is doing right now. Don't do it. Don't use one of these lengthy 1 to 5 point scale surveys that was developed in 1932. That's not going to make your culture any better. In 2025, we have CultureX, but we also have large language models in general. It's become much, much easier for anyone, whether you use CultureX or not, to leverage AI to effectively measure culture. And from a knowledge perspective, that's the most important thing you can do. So really, you just need will and you need knowledge.
And I think also what I'm hearing you calling out there is, look, there's not one solution to culture because there's like hundreds of categories, and you need to address the ones that you're weak on to improve your culture. And especially if you have those the toxic five, right? If you have any of the toxic five, maybe that's a higher priority thing because those have a larger negative impact on your culture than anything else. But you need to go get the data about your specific company, because if you spend all your time trying to remove disrespect because that was one of, or you, let's say you focus all your time on all five of those when only one of them was a problem, you're probably wasting a lot of time. Um,
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably the single biggest problem with cultural thought leadership right now. The vast majority of it is one size fits all. You focus on Netflix and you see what they did to be successful, and then the takeaway is you should be more like Netflix. Whereas the reality is what you should do to improve culture is going to be determined largely by your context, by your strategy, by your industry, by the people you have on your team to some extent. Culture is not one size fits all. And that's why measurement is such an important part of it, to understand what your exact situation is and the exact tailored steps that you need to take to improve it. Because if you're just reading a book about what worked for some other company, maybe that'll be kind of helpful, but it's probably not going to be the same context that your company is facing.
cool. All right, I want to be respectful of time. We are almost out of it. Where should people go to check out more about you, about Culture X, or about culture in general?
We've got a new podcast series, an MIT Slow Management Review series called Culture Champions. So the premise of this series is that the vast majority of companies do not prioritize culture. However, there are some that do and create really strong cultures. However, a lot of those cultures are not financially successful. But there are some companies that are both very financially successful and have very strong cultures, and that those are what we call the culture champions. And in this series, we interview the CEOs and CHROs of companies like Hermes, HubSpot, the Lego Group, Cummins, Ferrari is going to be up next. A lot of these really interesting companies. And we learned basically what they think about culture, how they were able to be both financially successful and create great cultures. And they're really interesting discussions. So I'd encourage you to check that out.
This is a trap question to ask so late in the podcast, but you just kind of you opened the door here. Is culture positively or negatively correlated with company success?
With financial success, it depends what dimension of culture, but broadly speaking, yes, definitely, it's an incredibly
Positively.
important. Yes, positively, it's an incredibly
I
important
remember you
factor.
mentioned that earlier. You said there was like a 23%, positive sort of stock impact or stock price impact.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's what we're working on right now. Actually, that research should be published later this year. But basically, if you look at some cultural dimensions like ownership, the total shareholder returns premiums are outstanding. If you have a culture of strong ownership compared to a culture of weak ownership, according to what employees say on Glassdoor, that results in an annual TSR premium of something like 8 or 9%. I mean, it's billions of dollars for
Wow.
these companies. It's crazy.
Wow.